What if I told you that one of the greatest demonstrations of faith in Scripture happened in the middle of heartbreak? Not on a battlefield, not during a miracle, not while receiving a promise, but while standing beside the grave of someone deeply loved. Genesis chapter 23 begins with sorrow, yet hidden within this chapter is a powerful truth that many overlook. A woman of extraordinary faith will leave this world. A husband will mourn the love of his life, and in the midst of grief, a purchase will be made that quietly changes biblical history forever. Because the first piece of the promised land Abraham would ever legally own was not a palace, not a city, not a kingdom. It was a tomb, and the meaning behind that decision still speaks today. Sarah lived 127 years. She was the only woman in the book of Genesis whose age at death is specifically recorded. This alone tells us something important. Sarah was no ordinary figure in the story of redemption. She was the woman who left her homeland alongside Abraham, the woman who journeyed through uncertainty, the woman who waited decades for a promise, the woman who laughed when she heard she would bear a son in old age, and the woman who eventually held Isaac in her arms as living proof that my promises never fail. Now her earthly journey had come to an end. Sarah died in Hebron, in the land of Canaan, the very land I had promised to Abraham and his descendants. Imagine Abraham standing there, the great patriarch, the man of faith, the friend of God. Yet at this moment he was simply a grieving husband. Scripture tells us that he came to mourn for Sarah and to weep for her. Notice that carefully. Faith did not remove his sorrow. Faith did not prevent his tears. Even the strongest believers experience grief. Even those who trust me deeply still feel loss. Grief is not the absence of faith. Sometimes it is evidence of love. Abraham had walked beside Sarah for decades. Together they had left Ur. Together they had wandered through foreign lands. Together they had waited for Isaac. Now he faced a future without her. Yet even in grief, Abraham remained a man of faith. After mourning, he rose and approached the people of the land, the sons of Heth. There he made a remarkable statement. I am a stranger and a sojourner among you. Think about that. I had promised Abraham the entire land of Canaan, yet he still lived there as a foreigner. He possessed no permanent property, no inheritance, no legal claim, only a promise. Many people would have doubted by now. Many would have questioned whether my word would ever come to pass. But Abraham's actions reveal something extraordinary. He believed the promise so completely that he was willing to invest in the future even when he could not yet see its fulfillment. He requested a burial place, a permanent possession, a place where Sarah could be laid to rest. The people respected Abraham greatly. They called him a mighty prince among them. They offered their own burial sites freely. Yet Abraham desired something specific, the cave of Machpelah, owned by Ephron the Hittite, located at the edge of a field near Mamre. Abraham did not seek a gift, he sought ownership. Why? Because gifts can be disputed, ownership endures. He wanted a legal possession within the land I had promised him. What follows is one of the most fascinating negotiations in Genesis. Ephron publicly offered the field and cave as a gift. On the surface, it appeared generous, but Abraham understood the customs of the time. He insisted on paying full value, no discounts, no favors, no obligations, only a clear and permanent transaction. Eventually, Ephron named the price, 400 shekels of silver, a substantial amount. Many people might have attempted to negotiate. Many would have argued. Many would have looked for a cheaper option. Abraham did none of these things. He immediately weighed out the silver. The purchase was completed before witnesses. The field became his. The trees became his. The cave became his. Everything was legally secured. And with that transaction, something historic happened. For the first time in his life, Abraham owned a piece of the land I had promised him, not through conquest, not through political influence, not through inheritance, but through faith. A burial place became the first tangible evidence of a future inheritance. Think about the symbolism. Abraham purchased land because he believed his descendants would one day possess all of it. The grave became a declaration of faith. Every stone of that cave testified to Abraham's confidence in my promise. Even death could not cancel what I had spoken. Then Abraham buried Sarah in the cave of Machpelah, a place that would become one of the most significant burial sites in biblical history. Sarah would rest there. Later, Abraham himself would be buried there. Isaac and Rebekah, Jacob and Leah. Generation after generation would return to this sacred place. What began as a moment of grief became a lasting testimony of covenant faithfulness. Yet there is an even deeper lesson hidden within this chapter. Notice that Abraham's first permanent possession in the Promised Land came through loss.
Why would that be?
Because faith often grows strongest when circumstances seem darkest. Anyone can trust during seasons of abundance. Anyone can believe when blessings are visible. But Abraham demonstrated faith while standing beside a grave. He invested in the future while mourning in the present. He believed the promise while experiencing pain. That kind of faith changes history. Genesis chapter 23 reminds us that my promises continue even when seasons change. Sarah's life had ended, but my covenant had not. One chapter had closed, but the story was far from over. Isaac still carried the promise. Future generations were still coming. The nation I had spoken of would still arise. The covenant remained secure. Perhaps someone listening today feels like Abraham. Perhaps a season has ended. Perhaps something precious has been lost. Perhaps the future seems uncertain. Remember this chapter. Remember that the God who fulfilled his promises to Sarah remains faithful. Remember that even in grief, my plans continue. Remember that what appears to be an ending may actually be preparation for a new beginning. Abraham buried Sarah in faith, and that faith became the foundation of future generations. The cave of Machpelah still stands as a testimony that my promises outlive human lifetimes. What I speak, I fulfill. What I promise, I complete. And what I begin, I bring to completion. If this story has deepened your understanding of Scripture, subscribe to Primordial Lore and continue exploring the greatest stories ever told. And now, continue to the next chapter, where Abraham sends his trusted servant on a remarkable journey to find a bride for Isaac, leading to one of the most beautiful love stories in the entire Bible.